There we go. All right, so I'm just going to launch right into things. I'm Sean Bennett. I'm one of the research librarians here at NC State. I tend to specifically work with the College of Education and the Poole College of Management, and I also work a lot with citations. It tends to be mostly APA 7, and then working with tools like Zotero, RefWorks, things like that. So in this little session, what I'm going to do is talk about first the basics of APA 7. We're going to demonstrate sort of how you can cite things both in text and in your references list. And then we'll talk about tools like Zotero that can help streamline some of these processes. I've pasted a link into the chat. That is our slides for today. They're really meant, we're not going to spend a ton of time in them, but they're meant sort of as a reference for you all as well. It has links to, for example, the APA 7 manual here in the libraries, which unfortunately is only available as a physical book because the publisher doesn't want to put it out as an ebook. I think they want to make more money, if I'm being cynical about it. So we're going to go right into that. And let's do, you think after years of the pandemic, I'd be a little smoother at getting everything set up, but no. All right, so we're going to launch right into this. APA 7th edition only came out about, my sense of time is bad because of the pandemic, but I think only about 2 years ago, if that. There were some changes from 6th, but we're just going to focus on 7. For basic formats, they actually do give you information about the size of your page, your margins, and your recommended fonts and sizes. Some folks miss this when faculty ask for an APA 7 formatted paper. They're actually asking for all of this, not just your citations. I tend to use 12-point Times New Roman, for example, but things like Calibri and Arial are also accepted. But the important part are those 4 sections near the bottom: your title page, your abstract, the body of your paper, the actual writing, and then the references. Now, for those of you who are on a dissertation or thesis track, do keep in mind that the guidelines for the ETD are a little bit different. They're going to have their own sort of regulations around the size of things, around margin, stuff like that. So just make sure you take a look at that. I believe the page headers especially are different between APA 7 and NC State's thesis and dissertations. They're very nice over there at ETD. I went through that process. They're very kind about pointing things out and saying, well, you got to fix this and this. So don't stress out about it too much, but do keep in mind there are some differences. Quick example of what a title page looks like for APA 7. You have your title up here in bold, your name, where you're actually sending this paper, the course name that it's associated with, the faculty member, and the date. This looks a little different for professional papers. For articles, that information is on the OWL site that I'll send later, but this is basically what those title pages will look like. Now, there's kind of a lot of different things to talk about with the in-text citation format. That general format, as I've put here on the side, is the author's last name and then the date. Other information that gets added is the direct page number if you're doing a direct quote. And you can also use what they call signal phrases. So if you say something like, Bennett argues in his paper that, then all you really need is just 2022, the date of the paper, because you've already signaled that this was written by someone named Bennett. And then the person looking at your reference can scroll down to your references and go from there. So you'll see signal phrases a lot. In my experience, faculty aren't super uptight about like, oh, you added their name anyway, you didn't need to do that. You can always err on the side of caution and always put the maximum amount of information in there. But if you have a signal phrase, you don't necessarily have to. Another tripping point for some folks is these block quotes. So if you have a longer quote, more than 40 words is the regulation, you do have to create this block quote you can see here in the bottom. And you notice he's also using a signal phrase. So Jones' 1998 study found the following. So the citation for that is just the page number because they've already noted the year and the author's name. And for the actual reference pages, there's so much variety that I think it's more helpful for us to just go in and start writing some of these things. Excuse me, sorry, library is a little warm this morning or afternoon. So what I'm going to do is we have 6 examples here. I go to the next slide. So we have these 6 different sources. These, in my experience, are the most common sources that people are going to be citing in their papers, especially in the education disciplines. So what I'd like to do is just go through these, and we'll go through the citing process together and figure out, and so you can get a sense of which ones are which. Okay. So our first one here is a physical book here in the libraries. This is actually the official guide to APA style for the 7th edition. You can see we've got one copy in our textbook collection, so it can be checked out for 30 minutes, and another copy over at Metric inside Poe Hall. If you haven't been to Metric, really, really cool place. Definitely check them out. So if I wanted to cite this, let's say I've got my Word document up over here. And this is the lorem ipsum, if you're not familiar with that, just basically sort of garbled text that doesn't mean anything. So if I'm going to cite something in APA 7, it needs to be at the end of the sentence, just before the period. And I'm going to go back to this, and we'll do our reference first. That's my preferred way of doing this. And for books, we need a bunch of different stuff. So let's scroll down, create our references page. And references should be centered and bolded. And then we're going to start our references page here. The first thing we're going to need is the author's name. And because this is something that was created by an organization, we're actually going to use American Psychological Association as the author. Let's see how badly I can type. And we want to write down when this was printed, which in this case is 2020. And the title of the work needs to be added in and needs to be italicized. I'm not going to type this out. I'm just going to copy this. So Control C. And then a handy little trick, if you do Control Shift V, doesn't work. It's all right, let's try this again. So Control C to copy something. Come on, laptop, work with me. Control Shift V, and it really doesn't want to work. Well, if you right click, there's options to say keep the text only. Maybe Word's just being troublesome. And that way it gets rid of all the formatting. Because if we don't do that, you get this kind of weirdness. If you say keep text only, it'll just keep the basic text. Now, APA style does call for, they call it sentence casing. So the first letter will be of the first word will have a uppercase letter, and the first one after the subtitle. And any proper words, of course, will be capitalized. And then we just italicize this whole title. Sorry, I was not monitoring chat. Okay. Yes, you are totally right. I did forget that full stop before 2020. All right, so we've got that, and then we need the publisher's name. So it's published by the American Psychological Association. And if it's available, we need the DOI. Now the DOI is a digital object identifier traditionally used for digital objects. In this case, we don't have one. So that's our citation for this particular book. And now the other thing we got to worry about is what they call the hanging indent. So if you highlight this, right click and go to paragraph, and I tend to mess this up, so apologies if this takes me a minute. If you go to special, it should have a hanging option. So then hanging by 1/2 inch. Okay, perfect, and that's what we want. So every single one of these will have that hanging indent. Basically, it makes it easier for someone to skim your references to easily pick out the author's name. Okay, any questions about that one? And you can use the chat or unmute, whatever's more comfortable for you all. Now let's go back to our slides here for a moment, and we'll open to the same thing for an ebook. And an ebook is going to have the same formatting. It's just going to have a DOI at the end. So in this case, we would say something like, so we have an actual author for this one. So Forsyth, Donaldson, R. So we'll say Forsyth, DR. APA does not use their full name. It just uses the first initial, for both their first name and their middle name, and then spells out their full last name. This was published in 2020 again, according to this. And we're going to grab this title again. So Control C to copy it. Right click, keep text only. And what's nice too is once you set that, if you continue down the page, you notice it actually has continued that hanging indent, which is really nice. And fix this little thing there. This needs to be capitalized because it's the first word after that colon, and then we just italicize. And it's published by, it looks like Routledge. And this should have a DOI because it's an online book. Now, most library entries will have a DOI in it. Let's see if it actually has it. It does not. If you can't find it in the library catalog entry, you can always go into the actual book itself, and there should be a DOI attached to it in there. There it is. So I just copy that text, bring it over, right click again, just keep the text, and there's my DOI. So ebooks, physical books, very, very similar. The only difference is this DOI should be present. And this can be really helpful for any researchers who are looking at your materials later, because you can literally just click on that DOI, put it into a browser, and it'll bring people to that exact resource. So it's really nice practice to put a DOI in there whenever you can. Okay. So then, of course, journal articles, which might in fact be the single most common thing that people cite. Library's internet has been running a little slow today. There we go. Okay, so let's say we want to add this to our references list. It's got two authors here, so we'll start with them. So we'll say this is Steve Barron. So Barron S, comma, Russell Bennett R. And there's our authors. We have two separate authors there. APA actually does have a limit on the number of authors you can put into a reference. I believe it's 30. You're probably not going to run into that very often. But at that point, you use the et al. When you reach that number 30. So from there, we have the year of this publication. Let's see, this was made in 2016. You can see that information here. And then we'll have the title of the article itself. And we're going to add those capitals to get that sentence casing correct. And the title of the article does not actually get italicized. Instead, what we're going to italicize is the title of the journal itself. So in this case, this is the Journal of Services Marketing. So again, I'm going to copy that over. Highlight it, italicize. And we need to get the volume number, which in this case is volume 30. Unitalicize, it's issue 3, so put 3 inside parentheses. And then we need to make sure we get the pages, which is 257 to 260. And then again, a DOI if it's available, which in this case it is. So you can see there's kind of a pattern to this. You've got the author is always first, the year comes next, and then titles, periodicals, DOIs at the end. APA 7 is actually pretty good about this. It keeps these patterns fairly consistent, even for weird things. Oh, was there an and there, Samanita?
Yes, because we have two authors here, so like
I got you. Thank you.
Also like a comma after S, full stop, and then comma. No, comma after full stop.
Gotcha.
Yes. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. No, I appreciate any corrections. Even after years of writing in APA 7, I still go back and double check everything I write before I submit it about 3 times.
Sean, you are the best. Just because I'm working with the journal, like I'm doing it like every day. That's why.
It also gets rough when you're working in sort of semi-different fields. I worked with
Yeah.
Chicago style for years and
Mhm.
years, so I think Chicago still lives in my head somewhere, and interferes occasionally.
It's
Uh,
really hard. Chicago. I mean, oh, it's like almost totally different. I mean,
I sort of miss the footnotes sometimes, but APA 7 I think is a little more flexible. So,
mhm.
but I appreciate any corrections. I want to make sure I'm giving the right information. Dissertations are another one that I have a lot of questions about because they're a little unusual. They kind of are in that weird gray area between peer reviewed and not peer reviewed, and people ask about how to cite something like this. Fortunately for APA, it is again very similar.
Sean, quick
Yeah.
question. So I was working on, I was trying to cite a book and it has an editor, well, actually two editors. And then within the book, each section has authors. How would you cite that?
So that's going to have, fortunately, APA does have a specific style for that. So you'll actually start with the editors, and you'll say like, so let's just change this. Let's pretend these were editors. So you have, I believe you add an ed. Actually, you know what? Let's double check this because haven't done that in a while. And one of the sites that I recommend for double checking things like this is Purdue's OWL. Let's go to that. I'd hate to give you the wrong information. And I haven't had to cite one of those in a while. But this site that I did link out in that slideshow for you all has some really, really great information. And let's check and see. Here we go. Oh, I was wrong, so I'm glad we double checked this. So the author actually comes in after the main title, and there's also different rules for books with chapters, like this one. So here's our authors, here's the title of the chapter, and then we say in the book edited by these people.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
Sure, good question. It's been a long time since I've written one of those out, and I had it very wrong. So I'm glad I'm glad we checked. So let's do this dissertations. This was by Judson Douglas Griffin here at NC State. So we'll go back down and say Griffin JD. And this was written in 2022. And you can see it kind of follows that same pattern that we're sort of used to at this point. I copy this over. And one of the reasons I grabbed this one actually is because in technically APA 7, we would actually need to put this into sentence casing. Well, not North Carolina, sorry, that stays capitalized. But the other ones would need to be pulled back down. And if it has a publication number, you'll want to add that in here. I don't think we have publication numbers. We have OCLC numbers, but that's something else. I don't think NC State has publication numbers for their dissertations. And then we'll say this is a thesis or dissertation. Let's see, what was it in? Because we have to add what it was for. So this was master's thesis. Let's see, make sure I've got this right. Master's thesis. And we want to make sure we italicize this. So it's master's thesis and then NC State University. And the last thing is the database that is in, and in this case, I believe this is actually in our own database. Let's just double check that. So this is actually in NC State's dissertations and theses. So we can just call it the NC State University Libraries repository. Now, from what I understand, it doesn't actually require a DOI in here. I suspect that'll change in the future as more dissertations have a DOI, but this is one of the ones that actually doesn't have it. Okay. Thanks for those links. And Purdue was my go-to for a very long time. I have noticed the ads getting a lot more intrusive. So definitely check out Somanita's links that she just put in there because those may be less intrusive. And the nice thing is that APA is an accepted style, right? So there's really, different sites should all have the same information in the end. Okay, so let's do a data set real quick. As more and more of us are using sort of data concerns. This is from Data Planet, which is one of our databases here at NC State. For example, this is dropout rates for grades 9 through 12 from at the state level of a database. And if we go down, it has all kinds of great information that we can then use to actually cite this thing. So again, we're going to do the author name first, but since this isn't really authored by someone, we have to go with the source, which is the National Center for Education Statistics. And this was published last updated in 2018, so we'll add that there. And the title of the data set goes in here in italics, just like the rest of our citations. And that's typically this one here. Dataset titles can be a little tough to find sometimes, depending on the database that you're using. And also, there's also a spot here in the citation for a version number. And in this case, I don't think we have a version number actually in the data set, as I don't see one. Since there's not an obvious version number, we can leave that blank. Inside brackets, we'll say dataset. Just need to make sure we italicize this. And the publisher in this case is, again, the National Center for Education Statistics. Apologies, no, the publisher for this will actually be Data Planet in this case, since that's the database that we're getting this out of. And fortunately, Data Planet has DOIs. If it doesn't have a DOI, you can just use the URL that you're getting it from. Since it does have that, we're going to add that DOI in. Okay. And that's the data set. Let's see. That's interesting, Tim. So you said in Zotero, if you copy to a clipboard, it doesn't italicize. That's kind of bad. I didn't notice that. Okay, that's good to know. We're going to talk about Zotero here in a few minutes. And the last one we're going to do is, because this comes up sometimes for folks, is that basically a YouTube video or an online video of any kind. Of course, everything has an ad. Everything has an ad. But this is the video called Experiential Learning. And the first thing, of course, is the author. In this case, it's EBLS. We don't really know what that stands for in this case. We could probably click on it. Experience-based learning systems. There we go. So we'll say experience-based learning systems. And then you can add actually in a username here if it's something else. So in this case, we'll say EBLS as the username. And then for date, we want to be a little more specific since videos can, have that specific date. So we want May 15th, 2020. Title of the video. This is experiential learning. Video, YouTube, and then the URL. It was actually pretty straightforward. It's not too bad. All right, so we've got all of our references now for this fake paper that we're writing. If we want to cite these things, let's say I want to cite the first one here from the American Psychological Association, I would go up, place my cursor just before the period, and say American Psychological Association 2020. I'm not doing a direct quote in this case, so I don't need to have a page number. And let's actually change one of our references. Let's just say, there's actually 3 other authors here. So we could say Baron SR, Hillhouse, JR. So now we've got 3 authors there. With 3 or more authors, you don't actually have to spell them all out in your in-text citations. In this case, we use just the first ones. This is Barron in 2016. So I would put my cursor here and say I'm citing Barron et al. 2016. Makes it a little easier so you don't have those citations taking up an enormous amount of space. And for direct quotes, let's say, just going to add some random quotations here. If I have a direct quote from someone, I need to make sure I note where that page came from. So I would go down to here and say, well, let's say I took it from Griffin's thesis here. Griffin 2022 P dot space 34, whatever it is. And then people can find that direct quote if they want to inside my references. Now, a quick note here, make sure, I actually did not do this, so this is good that somebody reminded me. Make sure you always put this in alphabetical order. So just looking at this right now, let's change some of these around. This one out. There we go. So just make sure it's alphabetized, and if you have the same person that shows up in multiple things, so say, you're really citing Forsyth heavily, put their materials in chronological order. So whatever they're writing, just say that he wrote something in 2019, that would go down here. If he wrote something in 2022, it would go above. So alphabetical first, then chronological. So that's sort of the basics of APA 7. And it's really good to keep these in mind, even as we explore tools like Zotero, which we're going to talk about now. Because Zotero, RefWorks, EndNote, Mendeley, all these citation managers are incredible tools, and they allow you to click a few buttons and do a lot of this in automated processes, but they're going to get it wrong occasionally. It's just a fact of how these things work. They're not 100% perfect. So especially for major projects like dissertations and theses, definitely use citation managers, but keep in mind that they are going to miss things. Okay, so Tim, general quotes, that's interesting. It's like a quote that doesn't necessarily have a specific source.
Oh, well, there's no specific date and when he said it. So it's just the thing that, was noted that he said.
That's a really good question. In most of those cases, I've had people like really, really try to nail down when he when he said it somehow. Place as crazy as it seems to say, wiki quote is actually really, really good at helping nail down kind of generalized stuff like this, because people will pore over documents and speeches and try to identify exactly when the person said that. I'm not sure how to answer that one actually, Tim. I'm going to write that
Because
down.
that's how I quoted it in the paper, was just putting in his name and the year, but I'm sure that's wrong.
Yeah, I'm not
So
sure.
yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
you can use ND, like no date, N dot and then D.
Okay.
For
Okay.
sources that you cannot find the dates, or it's too old that it's not even available online, just use ND, and then you have to make sure that you provide the link to the source that you cite.
Yeah, as long as you've got some kind of linking going out to something that you're pulling from, you should be good.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Any questions or anything that I missed related to these kind of basics of APA 7?
I have a question.
Please.
So I was quoting uh, from an article. It was a quote that he quoted in his article. So I was just kind of wondering how to go about that.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I should have mentioned that. So this is a real common problem, right? Like we'll be reading a book and we'll go, oh man, that's a really good quote. How do I quote a quote? So ideally, you want to actually find the source they quoted from and add that source to your references and directly cite that original source. If it's not possible, and sometimes it's not, because we'll read something and they did a poor job of referencing it themselves, you can actually say as cited in, and then list the name and the date, and that's acceptable as an in-text citation. So it would be something like, we could just say as cited in Bennett 2020, page 45. Now, ideally, you would find the thing they're citing and then put that into your references and quote it directly. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. I'm really glad APA actually has considerations for that because Chicago did not. But this is acceptable to use that as cited in if you can't find that original source. Look at you coming in with these great links. Thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Zotero. Zotero, Zotero, is a citation management system. It's completely free and open source. And we actually pay for one of these things at State called RefWorks. RefWorks, I've had a lot of problems with it recently, so I've been sending people over to Zotero. As I said, it's free and open source. It's not attached to your university account, so you won't lose access when you leave and graduate. And it is actually desktop-based and has an online functionality, by which I mean this thing you're looking at right now on my screen is on my desktop. All my materials are here. I can open it up no matter what, even if I don't have an internet connection. But because I'm signed into Zotero, it's actually uploading everything I'm doing constantly to Zotero.org. So this actually happened to me a few weeks ago. My laptop here crashed and it wouldn't turn back on. I was in the middle of writing something, but I was able to log into a different computer, download Zotero, log in, and it actually pulled down all of my materials for me in a matter of seconds, and I could keep writing. It was a really nice failsafe. So even though Zotero is technically desktop-based, it has a really nice backup system to keep all your materials online and safe. So what Zotero does, if you're not familiar with this, is a couple different things. First is organization. It allows you to pull in both citations and PDFs and keep them in a folder system here on the left side. And to show you what that looks like, I'm gonna actually go back over. Let's see, where's that article we were looking at? Here we go. So in all of our databases, you can actually download your search results and throw all that metadata or the citations into Zotero. It's also possible to download PDFs. Let's just grab this one now. So I've got the PDF here. And you can actually go into Zotero. I'm going to open up this folder here. You can open up your downloads folder here on the side. And copy it right in. It'll accept it and try and read it. And notice now here's all the citation data that we need for citing it, along with the URL to go back up to it. And because we put the PDF in here, we can actually double click on this PDF and it'll open it up inside Zotero. And you've got some tools here for annotation, for example, text highlighting. And you can even add little sticky notes. I use this to take notes. So like, look into this further later. So I can take notes on these things while reading them digitally. And I'll show you real quick what it looks like when you actually go into, let's do education database. Come on, there we go. So for example, if you're doing your searches inside the ProQuest education database, you can actually download your metadata to this and throw it into Zotero and use it both as a narrowing system and to keep track of your searches. So let's just do something ridiculously broad, education. 1.7 million, that's great. You can expand the number of items on your screen at the bottom of the page, but 20 is fine for our demonstration. We just narrow to journals to get a better sense of this. So I would select everything on the page that I'd like to save, and then go over to all save and export options. Download it as an RIS file. Oh, for goodness sakes. I log into this thing how many times a day and it still does that? Okay. Once you convince it that you are not in fact a robot, it will download the RIS file to your computer. There it is. And inside Zotero, you can then say, well, I would like to go to File, Import. I want to import a file. There's the badly named file. Hit open, and it's going to create a new folder with the metadata for those 20 items we just saved. So there's all those articles that I'm interested in. And this has all the information I need to cite these in my paper. And it does have a URL in case I'd like to go get that full text later. Then I can just drop a PDF directly onto one of these lines to actually attach it to that particular line in Zotero. So I'm just catching up on chat here real quick. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Anita. I really appreciate that. Okay. So that's how you get stuff into Zotero. And once it's here, you can see you've got different folders you can play around with. You can rename folders, of course, because this folder is just named after the file that we just brought in. So I would change this to, I don't know, general research, let's call it. What's nice too about Zotero is there's a deduplication button. So as you're finding more materials, if you're thinking, well, I've been searching different databases, I want to make sure I don't have the same stuff. You can click on this duplicate items, and if any duplicates show up, they'll pop up here. You can click on them and press merge. Now, from a citation perspective, where this gets really helpful is let's say you're working on a major project for a faculty member and they're asking, well, what do you have on this particular topic right now? If you're using Zotero and you've sorted your materials into different folders based on topic, you can right-click on a folder and say, I would like to generate a report. And this report has the full information, including the full text link and the abstract on what you've got in there. Now, quick warning, it will also generate any notes that you've kept in there, like those highlights and annotations. If you're like me, I tend to leave kind of snarky, sarcastic notes for myself. Those print off. Luckily, the faculty member that I was working with thought it was funny, but just keep in mind that if you take notes, those will be printed off in this section. Now, if you want to just send somebody a references list, you can also right-click on here, say create bibliography from the collection, and then pick whichever citation style you'd like to use. There's our APA. Bibliography, and then copy to clipboard. And now somebody said that it wasn't taking the italics with this. So I'm really curious to see how this works. Let me just go down, paste that in. It looks like it did it for me. Oh, so that might be a intermittent problem, which is really frustrating to try and figure out.
Only when I do it to copy to clipboard.
Interesting. That's actually what I had it do.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, let me try it again. Create bibliography from collection, copy to clipboard, bibliography, APA 7, hit OK. It might be like a formatting error. So if you right click and then say keep the source formatting,
Gotcha. Okay.
that might do it. Then you'll notice here that actually the spacing is a little funny for your references list. It does need to be single spaced. So in this case, what you would do is just select the whole thing and then go up to your line spacing and say 1, and then just give it a little bit of room under each one. And of course, these look pretty good. Let's see, Costa Castellanos, PM. Like I don't see any obvious errors right now looking at these, but always double check this. Zotero and the other ones are fantastic resources. Like this saves a lot of time immediately, right? You can see that. But spend some time double checking them. It's definitely worth catching stuff before it becomes a problem. And frankly, it's a good habit to get into to kind of memorize the basics of APA 7 and say, okay, well, if I have to, I can cite stuff by hand manually. It's not a huge deal. Okay, so I'm actually going to,
Quick question.
sure.
So, when we get those journals that have been copies of a copy and we're, put them in the PDFs in there, but not necessarily pulling in, all the data into Zotero, is there ways to kind of
That's a great
help build
question.
that out?
Yeah, so let's say, for example, that one we dropped in here, it did gather the information, but if it doesn't, it'll just kind of sit there as a PDF. Actually, I might be able to force it. Let's try this real quick. Yeah, this is actually a copy of my slides for today, so it won't know what to do with that. So let's just drop that in there. So it's going to try and read that in panic and not know what in the world it is. What we'll do is right click on it and say create a parent item. And that parent item, if we have a DOI, it'll actually pull the information for us. If we don't, you have to go to manual entry. And now you can see it popped that PDF under this parent item. And from here, I can tell it, well, it's actually let's say a journal article. And then I can fill out all the information that I would need for citing, namely publication, volume, author, title, issue pages, date, all that kind of stuff. Basically everything from date upwards plus DOI is what you need for citations. Fortunately, Zotero is generally pretty good at pulling the information out, but like you said, if it's a copy of a copy that someone's passed around the office for 20 years, it's going to have trouble. And generally anything before the 1990s, it's going to have trouble reading that as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, so I'm actually going to open up a new Word doc. I don't want to lose that, but I want to do just a blank document for now. Okay, let's say we are writing our paper and we're writing happily. We could always, write the citations manually. If you'd like to use Zotero, though, once you install Zotero on your desktop, it does install a plugin for Word, Pages, and LibreOffice automatically. So you can click on this Zotero button up here, and it'll link into your account as long as Zotero desktop is open. From here, I can say add edit citation. It's already on APA 7th edition, which is great. Hit OK, and this little red bar will pop up. And this allows you to search all your metadata from abstract to title to author. So I know, let's say if I just type in education, I'll get a whole bunch of stuff related to education. I can click on it, and it's going to kind of tell me what what it's going to look like. I can click on this again to add page numbers if I'm doing a direct quote. Hit enter, enter again, and there's my APA 7th edition in-text citation. It's also really good at doing multiples. We didn't actually talk about this, but let's say we need to cite multiple people on the same line. Let's grab the Acosta one, and then we're going to look again. We'll grab this one. Hit enter, and it'll pull those together for us. So in APA, if you're citing more than one person on the same line, you just add this semicolon and then do the next one. And notice it highlights the whole thing. These are basically little blocks of code. So if you go in and let's say you change this manually and change the page number just by deleting it and retyping, it'll kind of panic because we've now changed the code without involving Zotero. So to change these things, you want to click on it and then say add or edit citation, and it'll bring up that option for you. And then once you're finished with adding your materials or whatever you'd like, really, we'll create another references page. Again, we're going to center that, bold it, and then go back to normal over here. Click on Zotero, add edit bibliography. Of course, it did that thing again where it does that's kind of aggravating. But this is changeable. Click on spacing there, and there you go. And this will actually update as you're writing and automatically alphabetize and put things in chronological order. Again, double check everything before you submit anything major, because these errors are going to creep in. It's just unfortunately a fact. The most common are ones where for some reason it doesn't get the date right, so you see ND pop up often. And you can fix a lot of these errors by going in and fixing the actual metadata inside Zotero. Now, a quick note here. Let's say these actually look good. Just going to double check real quick. It's funny, it only does errors when I'm not talking about the errors. Actually, here's one. This should not be in this casing, right? It should be sentence casing. So if I go back and fix this, and there was COVID-19, I would actually want to go fix this inside Zotero itself. But I want to show you what happens if we do it this way. Slightly tedious. Okay, so if I fix that, and then I add some more materials into this, let's go back up to Zotero. And if I refresh it, I can mimic adding more materials. I'll hit refresh, and look what it did. It put back all this and all that casing. Because no matter what, when you refresh, it's going to double check against your desktop version. And that blonde deal article inside Zotero, let's go search. I'll click on my library, look up blonde deal. So it's using the casing that's here. So if I wanted to fix this, I would need to go like this and then there, and fix this all the way through. Now the sort of caveat to this, is, so let's say I'm about to submit this thing, and I'm done. I'm not going to use this reference again. I'm going to submit this thing in 5 minutes. You could just fix this, save it, and send it off. It will only get reverted to that incorrect casing if you open it up again and refresh your Zotero plugin. Now, as a matter of good practices, I would always fix it in Zotero. But if you're exhausted and you just need to send something off, it's okay to fix this, save it, and send it to somebody else. Their interactions with it won't revert anything back. This is only because it's attached to your Zotero account. I know it's a little confusing, so let me know if any clarification is needed on that particular point.
Did you say there was a way to adjust the double space?
So you have to do it manually, it looks like. I would have thought. I'm not sure why it's doing that, to be honest. It shouldn't be. We can manage our styles here. It might be something you can actually fix inside the style, but that seems kind of a bit much. For myself, when I've used this, I've always just, when I'm done writing, done it manually. But that's not exactly a great solution. Just doing it like that, then fixing each one. This may be something we'd have to fix in the style itself inside Zotero. I can look into that later and get back to you. What I tend to do with Zotero and others, because RefWorks does this too, is just manually fix that before I send things off. Still ends up saving time in most cases. Okay, other things to think about with Zotero. You can do group work in Zotero. You can actually create group libraries online by logging into your account at zotero.org. They're quite handy. Then you can both be pulling from the same materials. Let me show you what zotero.org actually looks like, so in case you decide to download that. The documentation for Zotero is excellent. It is open source. There's a lot of different people working on this. So it's got really, really good documentation, including a great quick start guide. When you go to zotero.org, you can just click on download, and it'll automatically figure out which ones you need. The Zotero connector is useful if you're going to be doing any citations in Google Docs. It's required if you're going to be doing it there. Zotero will pop up inside your Google Docs as a menu option after you install this. It's also kind of handy because you can save stuff from the web. Like if you're on that YouTube video, for example, you could just click your Zotero connector. It'll pop up on the top right, and it'll save that video to your Zotero account. All right, so we are bumping up against the end of our time today. So I want to be conscious of leaving a little bit of time for questions. Any questions about anything from basics of APA 7 up to Zotero or anything else library related?
I have a question for Zotero. So in Moodle, like when we get the journal articles and everything, do we pretty much have to move those over one by one, or is there a way to kind of do that metadata download like you kind of did from the library?
As far as I know, there's not a way to do that in Moodle. That would be really, really nice.
Right?
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, when you get a class that has 60 journal articles, it's slightly that would be really nice. Not that I know of.
Okay.
With that said, you know what? I would install the Zotero connector, keep it active, and then go into that Moodle, and it might actually try to pull them for you automatically.
Oh, okay.
Because I actually turned my connector off because it kept trying to download stuff. It kept being like, "Hey, you want this, right?" So, it might do it in Moodle. It might offer the option to just save it directly.
Cool. Okay, I'll check it out. I'll play around. Thank you.
Yeah. If you think of it, let me know if it worked. No obligation, of course, but if you think about it and send me an email, I'd love to know if that works.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions before we go out and enjoy the weather today and probably get more coffee?
Any other questions?
That was
Sean is still here.
Thank you.
5 more minutes.
And as you
I
all
guess
run in,
I was gonna say, any other tips or tricks with Zotero? Like,
I think go back into it real quick, and I'll share my screen here in a second. So we talked about the PDFs and the annotation aspects. Yes, actually, one more quick thing with the annotation. So let's say I've got, we actually added a few citations or a few annotations rather to this one, right? This beyond publish or perish. So we added the highlighting here, and we added a little sticky note here. We could also, if we wanted to, there's a tiny button over here for notes, and you could actually add an item note for yourself. And these are just basic notes, so you can actually just freehand type. And if you want these things because they don't stick with the PDF. So if I download this PDF from Zotero, none of this comes with it, which is really a shame. But you can right click on the PDF itself, say add a note from the annotations, and then your annotations come up and your highlights come up. So this can be really nice for building a bank of quotations that you like to use in your paper. I haven't incorporated that into my workflow yet, but I've had students who've used this to great effect. And I'm sort of the Zotero administrator on campus for lack of anybody else doing it. So if there are questions around Zotero or citing things, I'm always happy to at least try and help. Zotero is fortunately pretty solid. We haven't had too many problems with it. And the fact that it's desktop based has really gotten around some of the problems that RefWorks gave us, because RefWorks is entirely online. And we did have some people who couldn't access their materials while doing dissertation revisions because they didn't have internet. So that was frustrating. But Zotero gets around a lot of those problems. Yeah, so there is inside RefWorks. Sorry, I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen. Let's go back. So the question was, if you've started in RefWorks, can you move your materials over? You definitely can. So if you go to your refworks.proquest.com account, you can actually go to share, export references. And if you're on the all references screen, you can actually just export everything. If you export it as an RIS, that's that same file format that Zotero understands. Now here's the major downside. It does not take your file folder structure with it. It's just going to be a pile of references. It also doesn't take your PDFs with it. So it's just going to be the metadata. I will say that RefWorks accomplishes the same things that Zotero does. It just has a few more quirks. So if that sounds terrible, like if losing your file structure in your PDF sounds really bad, it's totally fine to stick with RefWorks. You're going to be double checking all of these things anyway. So you'll have very much similar functionality. Does that help, Nora? Okay, and if you have trouble with that process, let me know. I should probably put my email in the chat here. It's just sbennett with one T because they chopped it off at ncsu.edu, and I'm always happy to help. Really, it's the best part of my job is talking with folks like yourselves and helping solving problems.
Thank you so much, Sean. You are very helpful.
Thank you,
And
and I really appreciate your help through this as well.
you're welcome. And please make sure if you have any APA questions, make sure to contact Sean or even Citation Management Program. If you run into any issues, he's there to help you.
Oh, and we just had a question about how to access the recording afterwards.
Yes, so I will post it on AWCPE GSA website, and I'll make sure that students know when the recording is available on the website. You should receive an email from Anne or GSA president through, in the account. So yeah. Any other questions? What did you say, Sean?
I was going to say that sounds great, and thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. This was great.
Good.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I didn't
Take
even know
care,
about
y'all.
Zotero, so I'm like, mind blown right now.
Zotero changed my life. Like,
Yeah.
you still gotta double check everything, but at least you have a base to work from.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Well, if you have questions as you set it up, let me know. Because when you're getting started, that sort of late 90s interface can be a little daunting.
Okay.
One of the things I do with Zotero is when I'm uploading my readings, I also put tags in there for which class it's from. So that way I could kind of filter them, or if I'm doing a quick search.
That's a great idea. I never got
That's
used to
what I was
using
thinking about.
tags. All right, y'all. Take care. I'm gonna go get some more coffee.